everyone, and welcome back to the Armored Duck Podcast. I'm here with
Linkolas,
and we are going to be doing a bit of a special episode today, as I'm going to be interviewing Link. Alright, first question. What is something that irritates you about being a dungeon?
what really irritates me about being a dungeon master is probably people on their laptops all the time. It's really annoying when someone in your campaign just plays on their Chromebooks instead of actually playing the game. It's okay, not your turn at that moment, but if you're on your Chromebook, it could distract others, and it defeats the purpose of D&D. You're supposed to play in an epic fantasy world, but you're just on your Chromebook, which isn't fun.
I totally agree. When people are on their Chromebooks in my campaign, I get pretty mad too. But yeah, that's a big area of irritation indeed. Second question, is there any kind of players that make your blood boil, you know?
Well, we call those players chaos monkeys. They usually do chaotic things and they go like really crazy in the game. That really irritates me when they do that, because usually they don't really go along with the point of the whole story. They just do whatever they want, and they try to destroy things which you try really hard to build.
They're kind of a little bit of the ruiners of the storyline, the worlds that you've put so much work into, like making little secrets or anything. They just refuse and they destroy it all, which, kind of sucks, but it's part of the experience. Here, let's get into the world of DMing a little bit and talk about homebrew. What is your method of homebrew? What do you do when you're making your own things at home?
Well, homebrewing is my favorite thing to do. This is why I love being a DM. I get to build epic creations that no one has thought of yet, and I get to add it into my game. It's really fun to do that.
I'd say it's one of the biggest highlights of being a dungeon master. It's really fun to make a world where it's not just restricted by, these are the rules and these are the things that you should do all written down in a book, but it's really something that you can control and you can put your influence in even more than you are. Moving on from that, what are your methods of storytelling? Do you like saying just random stuff in your head and then just kind of twisting it into a story, or do you using ChatGPT or looking at your own life or, real life and putting it into this medieval world? I'm curious how you do that.
Well, what I usually do is I think of crazy ideas of how I want my campaign to be. I usually decide on it during a period of time and then incorporate it. But it also depends on what the type of players do in it. If they could totally change the storyline depending on how they listen and what they want. So I usually try to change the story up depending on what their personalities are.
You're 100% right about them straying away from the story pretty much as they can. Every time I try to make even just a little bit of a storyline, they always try to bring it down. They're like, oh, what? The king's in trouble? I'm gonna go kill this random guy. So that brings us to another big point of, player base, murder hobos.
Oh, I know those guys.
Can you explain to our audience what murder hobos?
Murder hobos usually just kill anyone who stands in their way, or anyone at all. They just like killing for the fun of it, and they usually mess up the storyline because they could kill a really important person that could be significant in the story to them.
Yep, that's literally the only thing. These players are the only thing that has made me incorporate no friendly fire. Just not killing each other the entire time and actually getting to do stuff.
I've had those people where people get mad at other people in my campaign just because they don't do what they want, and they try to kill them or do other stuff, but I don't let them because that just takes away the fun. D&D is supposed to be a team game.
How do you keep it fun? I'm curious how you do that, because with all these restrictions, and how do you keep it fun and interesting? How do you do that?
Well, like I was saying earlier, it usually depends on the character's personality, but I usually incorporate things that they usually do for fun. I get to know them outside of D&D, and I incorporate fun things that they like to do, their hobbies, and it just better helps get them into the story because it gets more fun.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Usually when it gets more fun, it's usually because it's one of their hobbies to do that stuff.
Okay. Now, getting into the more personal area of D&D, and even outside of the game, let's talk about dice goblins. People who have just too many dice. They're like, oh, well, I have these dice. Do you want some dice all the time?
I have something to admit. I am a dice goblin. I collect as many as possible. I get sets of 100 online, and I just do it for the fun of it. I have some characters who do that, and they use a different dice each time, which I think is pretty fun. I usually only use one pair of dice because it would just take longer to get every single set, but...
Now, staying outside of the game a little bit, let's talk about the perfect group size, because, you can have anywhere from 3 people to like 20. What's your ideal size of a group?
My ideal size would probably be 4 to 6. I mean, recently I did have 10 people in my campaign, and it was just utter chaos.
Wow.
I couldn't control any of them, and one of the problems was just a character who was just super rude and obnoxious. And after realizing how a big campaign could affect the whole story, I decided to move some people to other campaigns for the DMs who don't have that many in their group, and just to make my story better and just have it more fun.
So you even had to resort to kicking out some people because of their behavior. I actually had to do that with 2 people last year. And it wasn't even because of the fact that I had so many people, because last year we didn't have nearly as many as we do now. But last year I had 2 people who were, just being constantly inappropriate. They weren't staying with the campaign, and straying away from the story at all times. And I didn't want to do it, but I had to, because it was ruining the experience for others.
I hate it when people try to ruin the story just to make other people mad.
What do you do when there's a lot of absent players, or people who aren't there? And what do you expect people to do when you aren't here?
Well, it depends on how many people aren't showing up. Usually a bunch of people are really consistent, and we don't have that many absences. But last campaign, when I was DMing, I did have a few absent players, and it kind of annoys me, but I know that people have other stuff to do. So I usually try to get them caught up, get them along with their storyline, pretend like they were there, and I give them all the things that they were missing.
Do you take time out of the next session, catch them up, and tell them everything that they missed? Or
every campaign I always go over what's happened in the story so far, but it's really hard because if I'm not there, then there's no campaign, and I only get to do it once a week. So usually I try to get a DM who could just DM for me while I'm not there, but if that doesn't happen, then usually I tell all the players to go home, and I try to make up for it next week with some bundt cakes.
100%.
It really makes everyone happy when I do that, and it's really fun to just bake a bunch of treats for D&D.
So, I talked about earlier how I had to resort to putting no friendly fire in my campaigns because people were, killing each other. Let's talk about player versus player and how you should go about implementing that into a campaign. How would you go about doing that? Would you make it a all-around PvP centered, or would you make it optional to participate in PvP?
Well, actually, my campaign, I do allow people to fight each other. They can't kill each other, but they could do fights if there's any reason, if someone's trying to stop another person from doing something, as long as it doesn't interfere with the storyline. With PvP, I always make it optional, but when there is PvP, it's usually at the end of the campaign when it doesn't really matter anymore. So I do let them fight each other to the death and all that.
Alright, that is a great way to implement it without having it screw up the story or anything like that.
Totally.
I totally agree. Last year, at the end of the year, after my group had finished the campaign, done everything we needed to, we only had, I think, a couple weeks left, maybe just one. I had joined a campaign that was centered around purely PvP. We had a Hunger Games style arena that we went into. Now, this was, of course, managed by you. In this campaign, it was very fun. I think it was only one day that we did it. I'll tell you why. As we were going about fighting each other, I had asked for, I think it was 2 bags of holding. Now, there's a funny thing that you can do with these bags of holding, and it can blow up the entire plane, basically. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna go do that. I had destroyed the entire planet because I was fed up. I was about to be killed. I didn't want that to happen, so I ruined it all for everyone else.
That was quite chaotic.
In your future campaigns, will you allow people to use things such as bombs or crazy combinations that are a little outside of the rules? How do you do that?
Well, during my sessions, ever since that campaign where you blew up my whole entire world, I forbid 2 bags of holding in one campaign. People could have 1 bag of holding, but they can't, trade it. They only have 1, and that's just to store their equipment. I never have slots in my story. They just have whatever they want. They could have 100 weapons for all I care, but not 2 bags of holding.
Very interesting. Let's get into the story a little bit more and talk about character creation, making non-playable characters, NPCs, and villains or bosses, enemies.
With NPCs, I don't add too much time on making them. Of course, there's always that once in a while when there's this NPC who's really important to the story and significant. And I usually spend a little bit of time developing their personality and all that, but not as much as any other random person in a crowd. With bosses, I spend a lot of time on bosses. I want to make sure they're strong enough for the players, so I usually spend a little time for the campaign boss fight before I actually make them fight the boss.
So you spend time analyzing what the players have to make the boss beatable?
Well, beatable, but also challenging. Actually, recently, one of my players defeated a boss by rolling nat 20s all the time. He's not too powerful, but with his nat 20s, he was insane. I thought I should have made the boss a little bit more challenging.
100%. The balancing that you need to put into boss fights and, encounters where you are fighting, you gotta put in work to make sure that it's possible to do it, and you can, you can do it eventually. But you also want to make it fun and challenging to the point of where, oh, this is impossible, we can't do this. Or, oh, this is too easy, I just one-tap this guy. It's just not fun if you do that,
It's hard also with the attention span of the campaign members, because usually they just want to expand their army or just, find made-up characters that they make, because they think they're the DMs and could make up their own stuff, but I usually just go on with the storyline, and if they can't find it, they can't find it.
Well, I think that was a great interview.
Really good.
Learned a lot about your DMing, and I would actually like to implement some of the stuff that you've talked about in my campaigns. And I thank you, listeners, for listening in, and we'll see you next time. Make sure to check out our merch. It is on our channel page, and we're also going to make a Patreon soon, right?
Yep.
Awesome.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.